Hi and welcome back. In this video we're going to create our first Flask application. Flask applications are built around requests and responses. Now we're going to look very in detail at what requests and responses are and how the web works in the next couple of videos, but I want to give you a quick introduction now. Apologies for that. A request is what your browser does. So for example, Safari or Google Chrome or Internet Explorer. Whenever you go to a website, you're making a request. And there is a computer somewhere on the internet that is receiving that request. And that computer has something like a Flask application in it. So that Flask application receives that request from your browser and then decides what to do with it and then returns back a response. For example, one request may be to ask for a certain page's homepage. Another request may be to ask for something called hello.html for a HTML file. Another request may be to ask for user number 3, for example. So requests can be really anything, but the server, the Flask application, has to be created to be able to understand those requests. So that's the key here. In order to start with our Flask application, the first thing we have to do is to tell Python that we want to use Flask. That kind of makes sense. So the first thing to do is to say from Flask, lowercase f, import Flask with an uppercase F. Also, let's use this opportunity to save this as app.py. Once again, you can call this whatever you want, but normally Flask applications are called app.py. And we will look at why in a few videos' time, really. Now that we've imported Flask, we've imported something called Flask with a capital F from a package called Flask with a lowercase f. You may not have noticed, but classes in Python, such as our student and our working student classes from last section, classes always start with a capital F. And packages always start with a lowercase f, although we've not really seen this in practice. We can therefore safely assume that Flask with a capital F is a class, and indeed it is. So the first thing we want to do is create an app from that Flask class. So we're going to say app equals Flask, and here comes something a bit newer, which is underscore underscore name underscore underscore. So that's 2 underscores in front and 2 behind. And the underscore underscore name underscore underscore is a special Python variable. It essentially gives each file a unique name. And that's really all that we have to worry about. So when we start the Flask application, in order for Flask to know that this application is running in a specific unique place, we tell it this underscore underscore name underscore underscore. Don't worry much about it. Then the first thing we have to say is to tell our app what requests it's going to understand. Remember, earlier I said that sometimes you may request the homepage of an application. Other times you may request something like hello.html. Other times you may request the third user or things like that. So we have to tell our app exactly what request it will understand. And it can understand many requests, of course, but we're going to start with just one. In order to do that, we're going to use a decorator. So now we know what those are. It's going to say @app.root. And here is going to go the root, or the endpoint, or the request that it is going to understand. In our case, it's going to be a / within a string. And what this means is, for example, http://www.google.com/. So when you access a web page, such as google.com, really what you're accessing is google.com/. And the / there just means this is the homepage of the site. You can also do things like google.com/maps, I think. And this would be a separate route. You can do google.com/plus, I think. I'm not really familiar with Google's endpoints, but this would be a separate endpoint /plus, because they are supposed to do different things in a server. So if you leave it just as the /, that is the home page of the application. And as we know, a decorator always has to act on a method, so what's going to come after is going to be a method. In this case, I'm calling the method home. But the name of the method in Flask does not matter, so you can call it whatever you want. All that matters is this root. So now we've got our home method, we can make it do things. And whatever it does, it has to return a response back to our browser so that our browser receives something back and it can show something on the website. So for example, we're going to return hello world. So what's going to happen now is that when we access our endpoint with our browser, what we should see is hello world coming back. And then we also, of course, have to tell the app to start running. So let's do that, app.run. And here we can tell it a specific port. A port is just a sort of area of the computer where your app is going to be receiving your requests and returning your responses through. Computers have many of these areas, and in my case, I'm going to use port 5000. If you do receive an error when you run the app saying address already in use, that's because some other application in your computer is already using this port, so all you have to do is just change it for something else like 4999, for example. Okay, once that's done, let's go into the terminal. I'm going to clear this, and making sure that you are in the correct folder, which in my case I don't think I am, so I'm going to go init, code, section 3, video code. Making sure you're in the correct folder, then do Python 3.5 app.py. And what you should see is something like this, running on, and here's the interesting part, http://127.0.0.1 :5000 /. That / is important because that's the home page of our app. The 5000, as you can imagine, is the port that we've selected. And 127.0.0.1, for those of you more experienced programmers, you'll know what that is. But for those of you that don't, that is your computer. So 127.0.0.1 is a special IP address that is reserved for your computer specifically. So whenever you access this address in your browser, what you're accessing is your own computer. Because we're accessing using HTTP, that means that our browser is able to access this page. So just copy that and go into Chrome, for example, and then let's paste it in. And what we see is hello world coming back, because that's what our endpoint returns. Notice how Google Chrome strips the trailing slash from the end, but that's always present there and some other browsers will not remove it. So just because Google Chrome removes it doesn't mean we're not accessing the home page. And that's our hello world. And this was your first Flask application. And you've managed to create an endpoint that returns some data. So going back to Atom, all that we've done is imported Flask, created an object of Flask using a unique name, and then created a root, which was for the home page of our application, just the /, assigned a method to it which has to return something, and whatever it returns will go to the browser, and finally we've ran the app. Of course, these methods don't have to return strings only, that would be quite boring. But normally in REST APIs they do return strings, and it is a JavaScript application that deals with displaying things nicely. Flask can also display things nicely if we want, but that's not the purpose of this course. There is but there are a couple other courses, one of them mine, that deals with creating websites and web apps with Flask. This course is concerned with REST APIs, and REST APIs usually return text in a specific format. So we're going to be looking at more of that in the next coming sections. But in this section, we are going to give you a bit of insight into how you might use a REST API from within a JavaScript application. For those of you that are interested in using your API from within JavaScript, that'll be very useful. So the next couple of videos are going to be more about how the web works, how REST works, and things like that. And then we'll move on to creating the JavaScript program that will use this API just for your convenience. So hopefully all that's okay, and I'll see you in the very next video.